Hi, and welcome to the first episode of the Chaos and Beauty podcast. I'm Kate Clarity. I'm a singer, writer, and just generally very interested in and active in the arts. And as the title indicates, I said I was raised in an art gallery, and you're probably curious, in what way does she mean that? Was she sleeping in the back room of the Met? And the answer is, of course, no. But it's more true than not. And I think that I wanted to start with this because I think it unlocks a way forward for us in answering all of these really pressing cultural questions so many of us have right now and how to navigate it moving forward. So if you're someone who cares about beauty and aesthetics and art in general and why it matters, what it does for the human spirit, what it does for our civilization, I hope you'll stick around and even maybe subscribe. So what do I mean by that? That I was raised in an art gallery. I had a wonderful abstract painter uncle. And I grew up going to his home with my aunt as well, who was also an artist herself. And they had this lovely home that they very intentionally used like an art gallery. The walls were just covered in these giant, gorgeous, lush, abstract paintings that my uncle had done himself, and also some of his friends and some just wonderful other artists. So I grew up in the context of receiving that beautiful art in a really unique way, without any preconceived ideas, without anyone ever really instructing me. You know, when I was there, we weren't there visiting to talk about art or get a tour. I don't even know if I knew what any of them were called or what the backstory was, or even necessarily all of the ones that were my Uncle Terry's rather than somebody else's. And so I just would stop regularly while we were there. You know how the adults are talking and you're just a kid kind of wandering around in this museum-like home that you're not used to. And I just remember staring at them and letting them make an impression on my spirit. And the reason I think this is such a critical piece to starting any kind of conversation about art is I think that is the best way for people to come to a love of the arts, is just through gentle, constant exposure, especially as a kid, especially in childhood. We are so porous, I've heard it described, meaning we take so much in constantly. And so we're affected by everything we see, everything we touch, everything we experience, everything we hear. And with that in mind, we can use that intentionally to help us want to live for beauty and nobility and human flourishing. And so much of it starts with that. And of course, the flip side is also true, that when you're exposed to things that don't drive your spirit towards those things, it certainly has an immense effect as well. So that's just the core question, I think, to be contemplating, because even with my uncle's paintings, which were abstract formalist, he was a renowned Canadian painter in that category, which not everyone is always on board with for a variety of reasons, which for me is just a very important, interesting question. But I think the main thesis being that this exposure, especially early on, sets someone up for a lifetime of deeper perception, and even in my case, and in the case of many artists, for a life of creativity. So we get analog notes here, by the way. This is foundational for me. I don't do things the other way because analog's important to me. I know this is a digital format, but I like to write and I like to have my notes. So that's what we do here. I think it's really foundational to think about these things in this way, because I think a lot of times people live from the head down rather than from the heart up. And there's an argument for instances of both. And I think ultimately they're in a really important feedback loop between the cerebral functioning and the affective part of ourselves. They actually need to be in unity and kind of talking to each other. In a healthy person, that's actually what we're going for, is you want a holistic experience of life, and your mind can help direct your heart and your heart can prompt your mind. And that's maybe something for an episode all on its own. But I do think that sometimes our culture tends to be more in the head. Sometimes it's way too much in the heart, depending on the category of person. But especially in a lot of my circles, which tend to slant intellectual, conservative, religious, you do find more of this hyper emphasis, I would say, on the intellectual, sometimes to the detriment of just experiencing life holistically and affectively, which is arguably the way that most humans experienced most of life and even still do, to this day. So what I can best start with is that I have this view that we need this kind of gentle, organic, constant, long-term exposure to art and beauty in order to have like a real encounter with the arts and a real depth of perception and creativity, because it was my experience. So all I can speak to from that place is that I know that standing before those paintings left this profound impression that that visual poetry was a thing, that that you could have an encounter aesthetically with something that could change you, that could affect you, that could cause you to feel things and explore your own heart and your own universe. But it wasn't the only thing. So even my parents had quite a bit of art around our home as well. And one of those things was my grandmother's paintings, my grandmother who I never met, but it was always realism, farm scenes, so I never got to visit the old family farm, but I did get to see paintings of some of those scenes that were etched into her. And it was neat. She would take pieces of rock and leaves and things and put them into the paintings themselves. So to this day, if there's a bit of a mountain or a rocky part in the river or something, it's from a real stone. So I just always found that really entrancing as well. And then I was in an excellent choir. I'm from a small city, Saskatoon in Canada, and it has a disproportionately high degree of artistic excellence, especially for its size. And as a fruit of that, this children's choir, was founded, and it was so excellent that we got to not only travel to and compete in world-class festivals, but even sometimes won the whole world category. And we traveled, I was really young, we traveled to Europe, France, and Spain when I was 13. And prior to that, we had gone to festivals, more locally, but then also in British Columbia. And I'd met people from all over the world and had an encounter in that way culturally, and just got to participate in these remarkable stadium-filled shared choral pieces where you're singing with thousands and thousands of people, these gorgeous songs. And yeah, that started at such a young age, and I'm so grateful for that core thing in my life, because here I am all these years later, a singer and a writer. I've worked in entertainment for a long time as a singer-songwriter, and there's a lot more to my story that I want to share in time. But all of that, I can pull the string all the way back to my childhood and just this gentle, persistent exposure to the world of art and the world of beauty. And of course, my uncle's paintings on those walls was a critical piece of that as well. And, I really want to mention him, and he's going to come up a lot in these episodes, because as a really, I think, fascinating takeoff point for a lot of the questions that I want to explore with you all here, because they have sponsored this podcast and brought it into being, the Studio Stata. So although my uncle has passed away quite a few years ago now, I was really interested in carrying forth his legacy and using his work as quite an exquisite takeoff point for these pressing conversations that I think need to be had. But back to the gallery, back to my aunt and uncle's beautiful home with his beautiful paintings, and what was happening there. What did that do? So like I said, it's abstract art. That's going to be a topic I'll get more into in another video, because I have a lot of ideas about that. I'm a big Roger Scruton fan. I tend toward more of the realism, classical arts generally, and I think that there's a strong argument for why that can be emphasized and why that's beneficial. But I also tend to be a little bit more, open, innovative, about all these different ways that the human spirit can pour itself out in artistic ways. And I just tend to be a little bit more loose in my appreciation for all kinds of things. Now, his is par excellence example of the beauty of a human spirit being poured out into an abstract medium. And I would say that that's not always common, but his heart and his life and his spirit was so beautiful that that's what comes out in his paintings. There's this high degree of balance and proportion and texture and color, and just this remarkable aesthetic sensibility about what works in a work. And so when I was taking all that in as a child, I really do believe that it helped and formed my capacity for just noticing, that I had this so much opportunity through being in his home and looking at his work and getting to know him, even though he was quite quiet, but he had this beautiful, gentle, warm spirit that was just always, that you couldn't help but just constantly be aware of and be noticing. And because of that, I just had this formation of noticing. And again, prior to any preconceived ideas or knowledge I had about the arts. And that gentle exposure is how most people are formed. And you can't really rush it and you can't over-intellectualize it. Most people are not going to do best by just learning head knowledge about art and then functioning from that. They really need an encounter. Everybody needs not just an encounter. Sometimes one powerful encounter can really change a life. I think that's quite a common story, actually. But the overall formation really comes through this persistent exposure. So the idea of wandering through museums or a gallery is actually the ideal, and just getting to hear beautiful pieces of music. Ideally, in some ways, the more mundane the context, the better, because it just sort of comes into your consciousness gently and gently and gently, and over time does form you. But then also having this ability to start forming the attention to receive the things that are beautiful and that can transform us. So yeah, I would say that we have to be aware as well, though, that because of that power, I would say probably the closest analogy to the way that the arts go in, as it were, to a soul, especially a child's soul, is something like language. So a child learns any language usually before the age of 5, as I've heard it, is learned in a very different way than when we go to learn a language in our later years because of the way the brain works. And so there's just this absorption of the language. And that's why some people, if they end up with Alzheimer's or dementia, may lose languages that they've functioned in for decades, but that childhood language will still be there because it's in a different, more intimate part of the brain. And so it's a power that we have to be aware of. And then if we're aware of it, we want to be incredibly intentional about how we're forming our children. And I think that's something that we're not thinking about enough from a lot of angles. But the focus of this podcast is the arts. And the reality is that your children, our children, I don't have children yet. I would love to one day, but it hasn't happened yet. But our children, in a general sense, in our society, we have to want to recognize that what we're pouring into them is going to change and affect them and affect their lives, and also affect how much they are going to be engaged culturally and even creating themselves. And as we learn more about neuroplasticity, of course, there's always a time where this absorption can happen, and you can actually cultivate in your brain and your heart a different way of seeing in the world. It can always happen. But the most powerful time for this to happen and to take place is in childhood. And so I still just regularly feel so profoundly grateful for the influence of this beautiful art gallery that I just had the privilege of spending so much time in, and how I see, looking back all through the years, how much that encounter formed my heart to notice and to be present to the arts and to appreciate them and to want to create them myself. And that's what I've done. So I would leave you with 3 main points that, because of this reality of the porous nature of who we are and how we encounter the arts, we have to be very vigilant to protect children and ourselves. Number 1, try to be like little children. Learn to view with innocence and simplicity the things before us, and to let things affect us really quite intentionally, to allow ourselves to be formed by what is lovely and beautiful. instead of being blocked off to it or hyper in our heads, just to let things actually affect the core of our being and transform us. And then to remember that all of this is rich soil for artists, that if we want great artists, we have to start to build a culture of encounter with the arts in a meaningful, regular way. We have to have a culture that encourages and motivates and incentivizes people to spend time in museums and galleries and to buy art themselves for their homes and to support artists, to become patrons of the arts. Those kinds of things really are what build us toward being able to have a flourishing culture like we often admire when we go to Europe. And to instill that fascination with paint, with color, with words, with music, that when you can have a child especially, but again, people of all ages, it's never too late to facilitate those encounters with these beautiful different kinds of media, such that they can engage meaningfully with the work of artists, and then those who have a gift or have a calling can develop it into even a vocation of being an artist in this world. So that is episode 1, and I'm going to keep running with this. I think I like this format. I like just talking to you like we're friends. I hope you like it too. And if you would like to learn more about my uncle's paintings, please visit the link below. They're really lovely, but I challenge you to approach them with that open heart, particularly if abstract art is not your main go-to. There's a lot there to receive and to allow to affect your spirit. And you can also get to know my work as a singer and a writer. I have lots of different projects. That's linked below, and you can learn about all those there. Lots to stream, lots to learn about. And I always also have an art course, an art appreciation course that you can make use of as well at my website. So if you want to check all that out, please feel free, and I will see you next time on Chaos and Beauty.